Now to look further at these latest developments, we have with us Dr. Jung-yeop, a research fellow from the Sejong Institute. So welcome back to the show today.
My pleasure.
So the U.S. Special Representative on North Korea, Biegun, has now been in Pyongyang for 3 days carrying out working-level talks to prepare for the North Korea-U.S. summit. Now, when he first left for Pyongyang, we weren't sure how long he was going to be, but we expected maybe a day or two. But now he's there for a third day. And although there are some reports that say he might come back today, we don't actually know how long he's going to be there for. So what do you think why do you think it's taking so long for him to be there, these negotiations?
I think it's one good aspect of having this negotiation at Pyongyang with the U.S. Special Representative there as long as he wants to be there. Because in from the past experiences that if North Korean delegations are not satisfied with the process of the negotiations, they can just leave the table and go back to Pyongyang, and then there is no more negotiations possible. So now, U.S. representatives are now in Pyongyang, and there is no way that Pyongyang can just leave the table. So I think that it's one way that U.S. demand North Korea to be on the table and continue the negotiation with the Pyongyang as long as Mr. Biegun wants to have the negotiation. So I think that that means that Mr. Biegun can demand North Korea to negotiate with the United States as long as he wants. So I think that's the one good aspect. But we don't know yet whether that the content of the negotiation is proceeding well as expected by the United States or not. So I think we have to see after he comes back to Seoul or the United States and debrief both governments.
We heard in the report just now that there are suggestions that Trump told senior North Korean official Kim Yong-chol during his visit to Washington last month that the U.S. is demanding the regime to dismantle all of its missiles, including its medium and short-range projectiles. Does that sound right to you?
So I think we have to see whether that report can be confirmed with reliable sources. However, there are two things that, first, the reason why we demand North Korea to give up the nuclear weapon is that because having nuclear weapon is illegal by a non-proliferation treaty signed by almost all countries in the world. So because North Korea defects from the NPT and making nuclear weapons of their own, that is why international community is penalized North Korea. But there's no such treaty in about missile systems, and there are some missile systems banning the test and making the missiles of certain kinds. But many countries have their own missile systems to defend their own. So I think North Korea has some legitimacy to own certain kinds of missiles. So it might be difficult for the U.S. to demand North Korea to give up all the missile systems. So I think that the important part is to remove the nuclear warheads that can be loaded on the missile systems, but not the missile system itself. So I think that the report about demanding North Korea to give all the missile systems might be too much for North Korea to accept. So I think that the reports might be false, or President Trump demand North Korea to give up whole missile systems, but in the end, he might expect that North Korea to give up the intercontinental ballistic missiles.
It's a typical kind of negotiation tactic, maybe, where you start off with a high number and the opposite person starts with a low number, and then you whittle down to some sort of middle ground.
Yes.
What do you think North Korea are wanting from these negotiations as well? Because in that report they said they want sanctions to be lifted, but if they go like this, we can't expect all sanctions to be lifted, can we?
So now Mr. Biegun has explicitly mentioned before he went to Pyongyang that United States is not thinking about lifting sanctions until the full denuclearization of North Korea is achieved. So now the U.S. is providing more of political or diplomatic measures to North Korea on the while that North Korea is, as you mentioned, that wanting to have all the sanctions lifted or weakened. So I think there are huge differences between two countries, that United States is not going to lift the sanctions, but North Korea is demanding U.S. to lift the sanctions. So I think the first reconciliation that they have to achieve is how they are going to find the middle ground on those differences. So I think it will take some time for two countries to find the middle ground, and I think it's very difficult to find the middle ground with this short period of time of the negotiations. So I think we have to see whether it is really possible for them to find the middle ground this time.
You say it's very difficult. Then what do you expect to come out of these negotiations then?
So North Korea's position is like this, as stated in Pyongyang joint statement, that North Korea already took some measures like dismantling Punggye-ri and the Dongchang missile engine site. And by doing that, North Korea expected United States to provide declaration to end the war or certain kind of improving the bilateral relations between North Korea and the United States. So from North Korean point of view, it's now U.S. turn to provide some kind of measures, such as declaration to end the war. And after United States provide those kind of measures, depending on the certain corresponding measures that's provided by the United States, North Korea is willing to dismantle the facilities like Yongbyon. And when North Korea mentions about the U.S. corresponding measures, they are talking about easing the sanctions. And United States is not ready to provide the lift of sanctions. So I think that currently the most discussions is about Punggye-ri, Dongchang-ri, and the political and the diplomatic measures that U.S. can provide. So now two countries have like huge differences in terms of what would be the so-called corresponding measures for the process of denuclearization of North Korea.
I guess we'll have to be patient to wait and see what comes out of it. So far at the moment, in North Korea, there's been no word from the official state media of Biegun's trip to Pyongyang, and also no mention of the announcement of the date for this next U.S.-North Korea summit that was announced by Trump at his State of the Union address. Why do you think the North Korean media have not really mentioned anything like this yet?
So from the past experiences, the North Korean media has not reported all the diplomatic events right away. So when Kim Yong-chol visited Washington, D.C. and met President Trump and came back, it did not report until that Kim Yong-chol actually reported to the Kim Jong-un. So it was like several days after Kim Yong-chol came back from D.C. So I think that the Steve Biegun's visit to Pyongyang would not be in the North Korea's report until North Korea believes that it would be in their interest to report to the public. So I think that until that the meeting with the President Trump is finally confirmed, North Korea would not report to the public that there's going to be a second meeting between President Trump and Kim Jong-un.
Looking ahead to this summit as well, it was previously said that Trump might have also been joined by Xi Jinping in Vietnam along with Kim Jong-un, because Trump had previously said that he was hoping to have trade talks with Xi at the end of the month. But now it looks like that speculation has been ruled out after Trump confirmed that it's unlikely that it's going to happen. He said, if I quote directly. But it seems, I mean, why do you think that has changed? What do you think has changed?
The reason that there was a speculation, and also the President Trump mentioned the possibility of meeting with the President Xi at the end of February, was that there was this like deadline for the trade talks, that they have this 90 days of truce to impose another tariff on the Chinese imported goods to the United States. So before March 1st, that there should be some kind of deals made between United States and China to avoid any additional tariff on Chinese goods. So I think that is why President Trump mentioned that there should be some kind of meetings with the President Xi at the end of February. But now I think the U.S. believes that it's not in U.S. interest to mingle two summits at the same time, because by mingling the two meetings at the same time, that it would be in Chinese interest to use North Korean issues as a leverage to talk with the United States with regard to the trade issues. So I think the U.S. officials suggest to the President Trump that it would be in U.S. interest to separate those two issues. That is why U.S. is not having meetings with the President Xi at the end of February in Vietnam.
There was speculation, once speculation about Xi was going to come to Vietnam. There was even speculation that South Korean President Moon Jae-in would go as well for four-way talks, so they can discuss perhaps the end of war agreement as well. But was that always going to be an unrealistic target for this summit?
So there was two reasons why there was a high possibility that the other two country leaders, like President Xi and President Moon, can join in Vietnam. First one is, that, as we just talked, that there's a possibility that President Trump could meet President Xi at the end of February in Vietnam. And also, Mr. Biegun made a speech at the Stanford University the other day that it's time to end the war on the Korean Peninsula officially. So that is why we have this possibility. We saw this possibility that there's going to be like four-way talks for the declaration to end the war. However, now Chinese participation is not possible. And also, but there's a still possibility that President Moon can join if President Trump and Chairman Kim decide to have this kind of declaration to end the war. So there's a still possibility. And even though two leaders of China and South Korea would not join the meeting in Vietnam, there's a still possibility that President Trump could just tell that Chairman Kim that they agree to have this kind of declaration to end the war sometime in the near future. So I think that might be enough for improving the relations between two countries.
And finally, if we assume that the North Korea-U.S. summit is going to happen without any hitches, and once it's over, thoughts will turn to what comes next. And in South Korea, we know that Kim agreed in his last summit with President Moon Jae-in that he would make a reciprocal visit to Seoul at an early date. Is it natural to assume that preparations for that visit will commence once this U.S.-North Korea summit is over?
I think it depends on what kind of outcomes that we are going to see at the end of the February summit between Trump and Kim. So if the result is satisfying to Kim Jong-un, so he believes that now it's time for him to visit Seoul, then there's a high possibility that he could visit Seoul. However, if the outcome of the summit is not that satisfying to Kim Jong-un, so there is not much he gained politically or economically, then there is no need for him to visit Seoul. So I think the possibility of Kim Jong-un's visit to Seoul depends on what kind of outcome that we are going to see at the summit at the end of February.
And that's where we'll wrap things up. Thank you for coming in today.
Thank you.